Hey everyone, this week we're going to talk about how to know what to change when editing your images. So there's been a slight change of plan this week. The video I meant to bring to you was with the Himatic F compact film camera. So I filmed an entire video, I went out to Sheffield at the weekend, I did some street photography, took 36 exposures. Unfortunately, when I got the film developed, there was absolutely nothing on there at all, it was completely blank. So very disappointing, and there's obviously an issue with the camera that I'm going to have to get looked at, and I'll have to bring you that video later in the year. But today we're going to do something different, we're going to do some image editing. And I often get asked questions on my editing videos in the comments about where you should start with an image. So we all know how to use the sliders and the masks and things like that, but how do you know which ones you should actually change? Well, I think it's quite simple. It's not always obvious, but it is quite simple, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So I've got an image ready to go. Let's dive in and have a look at how we should change those parameters. Okay, so this is the end result that we're going to be working towards. This was captured at Derwent Edge in the Peak District. But the actual image as a raw file looks like this. In fact, this is 3 raw files. I took 3 exposures, one exposing for the highlights up there in the sky, one for the midtones, and then another for the shadows, mainly in the foreground, and then I combined those with a HDR merge. And even though this looks really dark here, because it's a HDR, it's got much more dynamic range than a typical raw image, so it means that we can really bring up those shadows. And when we talk about what we're going to edit in the image, what I think it boils down to, and this sounds obvious and simple, but it's often overlooked. It's just deciding what you like in the image and what you don't like. And then it's about emphasizing what you do like and then taking away emphasis from the things that you don't like. So obviously the first thing is it's too dark, so that's what I'm going to start changing. So I'm going to bring up the exposure. You see I can come up quite a lot. We're not introducing too much noise. It was captured at ISO 64. And it's a HDR merge anyway, so we've got loads of room to play with. So I brought it right up there to 220. You see now the sky is blown out, but we can fix that by using a linear gradient. I probably should have used a graduated filter when I took the shot, but I didn't, so this is the solution now. Just drag that down from the top. I am going to just slightly overlap the mountains there, but not too much. And then now with that, I could bring down the exposure slightly, highlights, but I think I'm going to bring the highlights down globally, so I'll just bring the blacks down slightly for now. So I'll close that, and like I said, I'm going to bring down those highlights quite a lot globally, and you see that really helps to reduce those blown out highlights in the sky. I'm going to come all the way down to about there. Okay, and then we're starting to look a bit too dark in the foreground areas now, so we can boost the shadows. Come up to about there. And we're already starting to look a lot better. I don't know if we need to adjust the whites. I think we can leave those where they are, to be honest. And I will just inject a little bit more punch into the image by reducing the blacks. You see the effect that has if I bring that right down. It just gives it more contrast really. So I don't want to overdo it, I'll just bring it to about there. Okay, so for my initial tone edits, that's more or less it. But again, let's look at the image, let's find things that we want to emphasize, things that we like, things that we don't like, that we want to take emphasis away from. So I want to make this look a bit softer. I think it's a little bit too, just a bit too crisp at the moment, and I know that sounds strange, people like a nice sharp shot, but I want it to look a little bit romantic almost, a bit soft with that nice golden light coming down. So I'm just going to reduce the clarity a little bit, and I can do the same with texture, but not a lot, just a little bit. And although these are really subtle changes, they can just give quite a big change to the overall image. It's almost like a subconscious thing, you don't notice it straight away, but it does give it that overall more painted feeling and just not quite as in your face and over sharpened. So we'll bring the vibrance up a little bit just to bring some colour into it. Vibrance works a little bit more subtly than saturation. If you bring the saturation up, it just gets a little bit too much. So I'm going to leave saturation where it is. And now we need to work on the colour. So one thing I don't like about this right now is that it's too blue. When I was there at the time and I took this shot, I was drenched in really brilliant golden hour light, and that's what I remember from the time when I took the shot. So I just had my white balance set to auto, and it's not quite captured what I experienced at the time. But I can just bring up the temperature slider to really introduce that golden colour, and that's looking a lot better now, a lot more like how I remembered it at the time. I would often change some of the settings in the colour mixer palette. I would maybe change the hues of the green, or bring down the saturation of the greens perhaps. But I don't think I need to do that with this image, to be honest. Instead, what I'm going to do is come down to the colour grading palette, and I'm going to choose shadows to start with. And what I want to do here is just introduce some more orangey tones in the shadows. So I'm just going to bring this little circle away from the centre. That starts to bring the saturation up, and as I move around the circle like this, it changes the hue. So that's about where I want it for the hue, I think. And then just set the saturation, not too much, just fairly subtle, around about there, I think. So I could change the midtones, could put some colours in there, but I'm going to leave midtones I think for now, and I'm going to go straight to highlights. So here I want a more yellowy tone, so around about there I think, and then just bring the saturation up until I'm happy. I think around about there is good. Okay, so that's my tone and my colour done, and all I really want to do now is change settings with masks. So I'm going to leave the global settings, and I'm going to create a linear gradient from the bottom of the image this time. And I want to emphasise some of the foreground, because I quite like the foreground. I like the grasses, I like the texture on that rock. So what I'm going to do now is introduce a bit more clarity that I took away earlier. So it's not the overall image, it's just a little bit of clarity and texture in that foreground. And I'll also bring up the shadows a little bit, just to bring out some of the detail in those dark areas. And I think that's okay for that one. So we close that one off. And next we're going to sort out this area here, because I really don't like how we've got those really bright blown out areas contrasting against the darkness of the clouds. It just looks a bit odd up here, so we need to sort that out. So what I'm going to do, and this might seem a little bit counterintuitive, but I'm going to soften and brighten that area. So I'm going to use a radial gradient, throw it out like that. I'm going to set the feather to 100, just place it over that bright spot in the clouds. And I'm actually going to bring down the dehaze. So that's really nice at softening things. You see, it blends in those blown out highlights with the surrounding area. And I can do a little bit with clarity and texture as well, bring those down. And you see it really starts to soften that area. It looks much nicer than it did before. It's still blown out. We can't really change that. You know, the sun's pretty bright. Sometimes you get blown out areas. But we can make it a little bit softer and look a little bit nicer. And we can just compensate for that blown out effect by just bringing down the white slider around about there, I think. Okay, we'll close that one off. And now again, I'm coming back, I'm looking at my image, I'm thinking about what I want to emphasise, what I like, what I don't like, and I really like this rock down here. So that's drawing your eye into the image down towards the water. So I want to emphasise the rock. So once again, radial gradient. I'll draw that out, rotate it, just place it over the rock. And with this one, I'm going to bring up the shadows a little bit, And I'm also going to bring up the whites, maybe even a touch of exposure. And you see how that really brightens the rock. If I just hide that, turn it off, you see it makes quite a big difference. And that extra brightness just really draws your eye towards it. I'm also going to add a little bit of extra clarity and texture, like so, and that's okay for that one. Just to soften that sky further still, I'm going to go back to my first mask, and I'm just going to bring down the dehaze here. So not too much. You see that really makes it nice and soft now. Maybe the clarity as well. And then I'll do the same with the whites just to compensate. Might even do a second gradient just for this top part, because I'm noticing now that the top part of the image is much brighter than the bottom part and it looks a little bit unbalanced. So I'm going to use another gradient, but not the whole way down, just the top part. And with that I'm going to bring down the highlights. So you see that really darkens the top of the image, just balances a bit more with the bottom. So I'll close that. And the final selective mask I'm going to make is on the light rays that are coming out from that area of cloud. So you might not be able to see them perfectly here, but if I just bring down the exposure, you can really see them now, and I want to emphasize those. I really like them. So I'm going to create another mask, this time brush. Now if I just zoom in on that area, what I'm going to do is make my brush fairly small. I'm going to find where the light ray begins, so around about there I think, then come to where it ends, make my brush bigger, and I'll press shift on my keyboard, click once, and you see it draws out a line which starts at the small size and ends at the large size, and that makes a really nice cone shape. So I can do that for all of the light rays. And I'm doing this fairly quickly now. This might not be the most accurate, but you can take a bit more time with this. So once we've got all those drawn out, we just need to soften those a little bit now. So we're going to use the subtract button underneath the mask, choose a linear gradient, and we can just draw that up over the rays. And you see that just softens the bottom of those out. And we can do the same again, click on the minus, this time use a radial gradient, draw that out at the top, just bring down the feathering a little bit. You see that just fades them out at the top as well. So quickly just close that off, and I'll just bring our global exposure back to where it was. I think it was 220, and then back to the mask, and here I can bring up the exposure. We could use whites. We don't want to overdo it. It needs to be fairly subtle. We could also use dehaze. And we can reduce the clarity if we want those softer and texture. And that's more or less the effects I want. Like I said, I would take a bit more time than this if I was not making a video. But you get the overall idea. And finally, I'm just going to put a vignette on this. This will help to darken the top and bottom. Again, it'll help for balance. It'll darken that sky up a bit at the top. And that's my final image. So that's how I go about knowing what to change in an image when I first get started. Your approach might be different. If it is, just put your comments down below. Hopefully we can all learn from those. But that's about it for this video, so if you've liked it in any way or found it useful, please just give me a thumbs up. Massive thank you to you for watching. If you're a regular, I really appreciate that, but if you're new to the channel and you're not yet subscribed and you'd like to do so, you can just click down there on the big red button, or over here on this little picture of me. That way you'll stay up to date with everything I'm doing each and every week. There's a new video every Sunday morning at 10 AM UK time. So I hope you'll join me next week for the next one, but until then, thanks a lot everyone, and bye for now.